Hey Samfam, this is Ria from Samaya. Today we are going to discuss about SF402, audit considerations relating to an entity using a service organization. What's it's called? It's in our daily term usage, it's known as using an outsourcing entity. It's outsourcing a process of its internal control system or a part of its internal control system. Why auditor is so concerned about these service organization is that since auditor has to audit and give some like a report on the internal controls or any kind of deficiencies in the internal controls with regards to financial statements and all. So he has to check the internal controls. For that, since a part of the internal controls are being outsourced to this service organization, auditor is also concerned about this internal controls in the service organization. This is the importance of the SF402. And first, we'll see the objective of the auditor with regards to SF402. The objective of the user auditor. Who is user auditor? User auditor is an entity that user auditor, an auditor who audits and reports on the financial statement of a user entity. What is a user entity? An entity uses service organization service and whose financial statements are being audited. This user entity is a client of the auditor, is a company that we are going to audit. Yeah. So the user auditor is someone that is we who audits the user entity. When the user entity uses the service of service organization like BPO, etc., to obtain an understanding of the nature and significance of the services provided by service organization. That is what part of internal controls that are being outsourced to that service organization, obtaining understanding with regards to that services and their effect on user entities' internal controls. You see, these services are a part of internal control system, which would affect the internal controls in the user entity. That's the entity we are going to audit. Sufficient to identify and assess the risk of material misstatement. This what comes with SA315. It's an extension for SA315 to identify and assess the risk of material misstatement. To design and perform audit procedures responsive to those risks. What is our golden rule? Whenever auditor finds any fraud or deficiency, irregularity, any risk, what he has to do? He has to respond to them and provide some remedial actions for those risks. So he is performing audit procedures in responsive to those risks. And who is service auditor? Service auditor is who audits that service organization. That is the third party from whom we are taking that service. The entity is taking some services, right? That organization auditor. Service organization is that third party organization. Complementary user entity controls. Complementary user entity controls were such controls. You see, the auditor, the client of the auditor, that the company user entity, say, is outsourcing some services or some part of internal controls to the service organization, and service organization is having that thought that the user entity also had some internal controls with regards to whether the services that are provided by the service organization were relevant to them or whether accurate to them or not. That is, it's expecting that the service organization is expecting that the company is having different controls. What company user entity is having different controls to make sure that even if the control fails, that is, even if the control fails in the service organization, there are some other controls to protect their information or protect their kind of internal control system, etc. That is, these are controls in user entity that service organization is presuming. And this is the soul of the SA402, type 1 report and type 2 report. This is so simple. We'll just see it here. Type 1 report is such report on description and design of controls at service organization. You see, this is a report given by whom? The service auditor, the service organization's auditor, the third party auditor. What he's describing the description and design of those controls in the service organization, the description of service organization systems controls and related controls that are designed and implemented, and a report by service auditor that includes service auditor's opinion, or service auditor report includes his opinion on description of service and the controls that were suitable for the design of controls to achieve the specified control. First, what type 1 report consists of? It consists of description and design, and it also consists of an report by the service auditor on his opinion on such description and design. Okay, what is type 2 report? Type 2 report on, it's a report on description design. That is, description and design was covered in type 1. Plus, operating effectiveness of controls at service organization. You see, description and design were like policies and procedures or rules and regulations or the structure or the environment that was created. Operating effectiveness is the maintenance. That is how well the internal control system that was designed or curated by the management, how well it is being operated by the employees or operating staff. What do it need to contain? A description of the services that were designed, implemented, and their operating effectiveness. Plus, what is second part? A report of service auditor. What? Describing the description, suitability of the designs of the controls and operating effectiveness. And since he's saying he's putting his opinion on the operating effectiveness, how he had done that, what audit procedures he have done, that audit procedures, that is tests of controls, that was used by the service auditor, were also given in this report. And with that said, these were type 1 and type 2 reports. Obtaining an understanding of the services provided by service organization, including internal control. We have seen this phrase somewhere in the objectives of the auditor here, right? Obtaining understanding of the services provided by service organization, right? What we have to know? We have to know the nature of services, nature and materiality of the transactions, and the degree of interaction between service organization and user entity, and the nature of relationship between user entity and service organization. You see, they have nature of services and nature of relationship between them, and they have nature and materiality of the transactions processed or accounts. That is, like if they have outsourced the payment, payroll expenditure, or any kind of traveling expenditure. If it's a traveling company, all the ticket bookings and all, the travel company, if it wants to concentrate only on its core activity of acquiring the tourists, etc., all the ticket booking and hotel management and always outsourced to some other party, some other organization, service organization, even that transactions and the interaction between SO and service organization and user entity, the degree of interaction. Nature of services and nature and material of the transactions and nature of relationship between them and the degree of interaction. See, when there should be a relationship, there obviously comes interaction, right? You have to make a note like that. And auditor plans to use type 1 or type 2 report as audit evidence. Why auditor had went for the entity? He went to give an auditor's opinion on the financial statements, including internal controls. For that, what he has to do? He has to obtain sufficient and appropriate audit evidence. That's all we know that. Now, in that sufficient and appropriate audit evidence, if he includes type 1 and type 2 report, which were including the description and design of controls, he has to evaluate that. What he has to do with those, what he has to evaluate? He has to evaluate what are those in the type 1 and type 2 report. Only he has to evaluate that. What does type 1 and type 2 control consist of? Description and design of the controls in the service organization. Have to do that. Evaluate the sufficiency and appropriateness of audit evidence. What we have discussed in our earlier videos. Whenever there's an audit evidence, if the auditor has to evaluate, he has to use the adjectives sufficiency and appropriateness of the audit evidence. We don't want any other like fluke of audit evidence. We want only sufficient and appropriate audit evidence. That's what needed to form an opinion. By the report, further understanding of user entities' internal controls were relevant to the audit. Determine whether complementary user entity controls identified by SO are relevant to UE. What we have discussed about complementary user entity controls, that SO has presumed that few controls were there also in the user entity to check the services made by the SO. That's what. Even such audit procedures or such internal controls were relevant or not, we have to check. First, what he is evaluating, he evaluating internal controls in the service organization. Now he is evaluating, he should determine whether those complementary user entity controls, that is, the controls in the user entity were relevant to UE or not, that were presumed by service organization. evaluating whether the tests of control performed by service auditor are relevant. How he know whether, how could he evaluate in type 2 report? In type 2 report, what he have also provided, he also provided description of the tests of control in order to comment on operating effectiveness. So he also have to evaluate that. This is so simple answer. If you know what is type 1 and type 2, what all it consists of, you could write that. You could write that auditor has to evaluate this, that, and etc. These were all the things that were in type 1 and type 2 reports, and this is all specific for type 2 report. And this is something you have to remember. Complementary user entity controls that were identified by SO, and the time period cover by the test of control and the time elapsed. Only thing you have to make an effort is with this and the time period. That's it. You were good to go with that. And this is the last portion here. Yeah. Type 1 and Type 2 reports that exclude services of sub-service organization. What is sub-service organization? As user entity is taking service organizations help or outsourcing work to service organization, even service organization also outsourcing its services to another sub-service organization. You see, user entity is a traveling company. It outsourced the ticket booking to a service company. Now that service organization had outsourced all the Europe tickets, traveling tickets to another sub-service organization, or it had it had outsourced like hotel bookings or food, or like to train tickets, etc., to different kinds of sub-service organization. Then what the auditor has to do? If SO uses a sub-service organization, the service auditor's report may either include or exclude the sub-service organization relevant control objectives or not. You see, they are saying that if a service organization, if SO is using SSO's services, it may include or exclude. There's no regulation with that. If it includes that, it is called inclusive method. If it excludes those, it is carve-out method. When if the type 1 and type 2 were using this carve-out method, that is excluding the SSO's internal control, the auditor has to evaluate with his professional judgment whether those were also required to apply the SAs or not, relevant SAs or not, depend upon the relevance of those control. And with that said, we have completed SA 402.